"Ma'am, if you have nothing to hide, then why are you nervous?" The question cut through the afternoon air just as the sound of a gas pump clicked to a stop. Every head near pump 6 seemed to turn at once. Angela Brooks slowly lifted her eyes from the receipt in her hand and looked at the officer standing across from her. She was 42 years old, dressed in a simple navy cardigan, dark jeans, and comfortable walking shoes. Nothing about her appearance drew attention. Nothing about her suggested controversy. Yet somehow, in the middle of a busy gas station outside Richmond, Virginia, she had become the center of everyone's attention. The warm spring sunlight reflected off the rows of parked vehicles. A delivery truck idled near the convenience store entrance. Somewhere behind the building, a train horn echoed in the distance. Life had been moving normally only moments earlier. Now it felt as though the entire parking lot had frozen. Beside Angela stood her 8-year-old grandson, Caleb. The boy clutched a small dinosaur backpack against his chest. His eyes moved nervously between his grandmother and the uniformed officers. Angela placed one gentle hand on his shoulder without looking away from the man in front of her. "Officer," she said calmly, "I've answered every question you've asked." Her voice was steady, not defensive, not angry, just calm. The officer folded his arms. His name tag read Daniel Cooper. Young enough to still carry the sharp confidence of someone eager to prove himself, Cooper glanced toward the black SUV parked beside the pump. "The vehicle registration doesn't match what we expected," he said. "Until we sort that out, I need you to remain here." A small crowd had already begun forming. People always slowed down when they sensed something unusual. A woman holding a coffee stepped closer. A man filling up a pickup truck discreetly pulled out his phone. Near the station entrance, 2 teenagers whispered to each other while pretending not to stare. Angela noticed all of it. The curious looks, the assumptions, the quiet judgments forming in real time. She had experienced them before, more times than she cared to remember. Yet her expression never changed. Earlier that day had been completely ordinary. She and Caleb had spent the morning at a pediatric specialist's office nearly 40 miles away. The appointment had gone well. Caleb had even convinced her to stop for ice cream afterward despite the doctor recommending fewer sweets. The boy was still wearing a chocolate stain on the sleeve of his t-shirt as evidence of his victory. It should have been a simple drive home. Instead, here they were. Officer Cooper stepped toward the SUV again. "You said this vehicle belongs to your family." "It does," Angela replied. "Then why does this registration raise questions?" Angela glanced briefly toward the dashboard. "Because you're looking at outdated information." Cooper frowned. "That's not what dispatch told me." Angela exhaled quietly. The breeze moved a few strands of silver-highlighted hair near her temple. "Then dispatch has incomplete information." A few people in the crowd exchanged looks. Cooper's jaw tightened. The answer clearly annoyed him. Not because it was disrespectful, because it sounded confident. Across the parking lot, Caleb tugged gently on his grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma," he whispered. Angela immediately turned toward him. Her face softened. "It's okay, sweetheart." "Are we in trouble?" The question hung in the air. Several people nearby listened. Angela crouched slightly so she could look him directly in the eye. "No," she said. "We're going to be just fine." Caleb nodded, though he didn't look convinced. Angela offered a small smile, the kind that came from experience, the kind that reassured others even when circumstances were uncertain. When she stood again, Officer Cooper was staring at her. Not suspicious exactly, more confused, as though her calmness itself was somehow unexpected. Then his radio crackled. A burst of static filled the air. Cooper stepped aside and listened. His expression changed, just slightly. The confidence remained, but now there was something else beneath it. Uncertainty. He looked back toward Angela, then toward the SUV, then at the crowd. The afternoon sun glinted across the station windows like polished glass. Somewhere overhead, dark clouds began, gathering at the edge of the horizon. And although nobody standing there could possibly know it yet, within the next few minutes, a single phone call would transform this ordinary gas station into the center of a conversation reaching far beyond Virginia. Officer Cooper lowered the radio from his shoulder and stared toward the black SUV again. Whatever dispatch had just told him clearly had not resolved his concerns. If anything, it seemed to deepen them. Around the gas station, the atmosphere continued to tighten. Engines hummed. Gas pumps clicked. Shopping bags rustled in the breeze. Yet beneath those ordinary sounds was something else now, an uncomfortable stillness that settled over everyone watching. Angela Brooks stood beside Pump 6 with the same calm posture she had maintained from the beginning. She neither argued nor demanded attention. She simply waited. The patience came from years of experience. Long before she became a grandmother, Angela had spent nearly 2 decades teaching 5th grade at a public elementary school outside Norfolk. She had guided children through spelling tests, science fairs, playground disagreements, and difficult family situations. Thousands of young faces had passed through her classroom over the years. Some remembered fractions. Some remembered history lessons. Most remembered how safe they felt when they walked through her classroom door. Even after retirement, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime solving problems without raising her voice. Caleb tugged gently at her sleeve again. The little boy's brown eyes searched her face for reassurance. Angela smiled and adjusted the strap of his dinosaur backpack. "Remember what I told you?" she asked softly. Caleb nodded. "Stay calm." "That is right. Even when things are confusing?" Angela nodded. "Especially then." The boy thought about that for a moment before wrapping both hands around the backpack again. Nearby, a woman holding a fountain drink lowered her phone slightly. Something about Angela's interaction with her grandson seemed to affect the crowd. The whispers became quieter. The assumptions became less certain. People had expected nervousness, maybe even confrontation. Instead, they saw a grandmother comforting a child. Officer Cooper approached again, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "I need to ask a few more questions." "Of course. How long have you owned this vehicle?" "Our family has had it for a while." Cooper wrote something down. "And who is listed as the primary owner?" Angela looked at him. For a brief second, something almost amused passed through her eyes. That information should already be available through the registration records. Cooper's pen stopped moving. Several people nearby exchanged glances. It was not a hostile answer. It was simply accurate. The officer shifted his weight. "I would still like to hear it from you." Angela nodded politely. "Then I will gladly answer once the records are updated correctly." Cooper's jaw tightened again. The response was respectful, yet somehow it left him with nowhere to go. A gust of wind swept across the parking lot. Overhead, the clouds that had been gathering on the horizon drifted closer. Their shadows stretched across the pavement. Inside the convenience store, a clerk peeked through the front window. Even the employees seemed invested now. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, in a secure office building lined with polished floors and government insignias, a notification appeared on a screen. Then another. A routine security system had flagged an unusual sequence of events. Nothing alarming at first, just enough to trigger a review. Back at the gas station, nobody knew any of that was happening. Angela certainly did not. She was focused entirely on Caleb, who was beginning to look tired from the long day. "Would you like some water?" she asked. "Yes, please." Angela reached into the SUV through the passenger door and retrieved a bottle. As she handed it to him, something slipped from her purse onto the seat. It was only visible for a moment before she tucked it away again. A simple identification card inside a dark leather holder. Officer Cooper noticed it immediately. His eyes narrowed. "What was that?" he asked. Angela looked up. "Just an identification card." "May I see it?" There was no hesitation in her answer. "Certainly." She opened the holder and offered it calmly. Cooper accepted it. His confident expression remained in place for the first few seconds. Then he looked closer. The color slowly drained from his face. He checked the card again. Then again. His eyes moved from the identification to Angela, then back to the identification. Around them, nobody understood what had suddenly changed. But for the first time since arriving at the gas station, Officer Daniel Cooper no longer looked like the person in control of the situation. Officer Cooper stared at the identification card as though it had suddenly become written in a language he did not understand. The sounds of the gas station seemed to fade around him. The traffic moving along the highway beyond the service road. The hum of engines. The distant chirp of a car alarm. Everything blurred together beneath the weight of a realization he could not yet fully process. Angela Brooks remained perfectly still. Her expression never changed. She simply waited. The same way she had waited for impatient students to find the correct answer during a difficult lesson. The same way she had waited through countless misunderstandings during her life. Calm, patient, unshaken. Cooper looked down at the card again. The leather holder was worn from years of use. Nothing flashy. Nothing that demanded attention. Yet the information printed inside carried a significance far greater than anyone standing in that parking lot could imagine. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Angela tilted her head slightly. "It belongs to me." Cooper swallowed. His eyes moved across the identification one more time before returning it. "I see." The words sounded hollow even to him. Nearby, several members of the crowd noticed the change immediately. Earlier, the officer had spoken with certainty. Now uncertainty lingered in every syllable. The woman holding the fountain drink exchanged a glance with the man recording on his phone. Something had shifted. Nobody knew what, but everyone could feel it. Caleb finished a sip of water and looked up at his grandmother. "Can we go home soon?" Angela smiled gently. "I hope so, sweetheart." The boy nodded. He trusted her completely. To him, she was simply Grandma. The person who remembered every birthday, packed snacks for long drives, and knew exactly how to make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. He had no idea why strangers seemed so interested in her. Across the parking lot, another patrol vehicle rolled into the station. A second officer stepped out and walked toward Cooper. The two exchanged a brief conversation several yards away from the crowd. Their voices were low, their expressions serious. The second officer looked toward Angela once, then looked again. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When it ended, both men appeared far less certain than before. Clouds drifted overhead, dimming the afternoon sunlight. Shadows stretched across the pavement. The air felt cooler now. Angela folded her hands loosely in front of her and watched the sky. She had always loved moments just before rain. There was honesty in them. The world seemed quieter, more reflective. For a brief moment, her thoughts drifted elsewhere. She remembered another cloudy afternoon years earlier. A military ceremony held on a large parade field. Rows of uniforms, brass instruments gleaming beneath gray skies, flags moving in the wind. She remembered standing beside Marcus as another promotion was announced. Even then, despite the prestige and responsibility that followed him everywhere, he had squeezed her hand and whispered something that made her laugh. Some people saw medals. Some saw rank. Angela had always seen the same man who forgot where he left his reading glasses and insisted on making terrible jokes before breakfast. A sudden vibration interrupted Cooper's thoughts. His radio crackled again. This time the urgency was impossible to miss. "Officer Cooper, respond immediately." The voice coming through dispatch sounded tense. Cooper stepped away from the crowd. "Go ahead." A pause followed. Then another voice joined the communication. Not local dispatch. Someone else. Someone unfamiliar. Cooper's posture straightened instantly. "Confirm your location," the voice said. Cooper frowned. "Gas station off Route 250. Is Mrs. Angela Brooks currently present?" Cooper glanced toward her. Every muscle in his body seemed to tighten at once. "Yes." Silence followed. Then came words he never expected to hear during an ordinary shift. "Remain where you are. Additional personnel are already en route." Cooper blinked. "What personnel?" No answer came immediately, only static. Then one final instruction. "Do not leave the scene." The transmission ended. Cooper lowered the radio slowly. The second officer was staring at him. What was that? Cooper looked toward Angela. She stood beside her grandson exactly as before. Calm, unbothered, almost as if she already understood something everyone else had yet to discover. For the first time that afternoon, a feeling settled into Cooper's chest that had nothing to do with suspicion. It was the growing realization that this situation was far bigger than he had ever imagined. The second officer rubbed the back of his neck and looked toward the highway. "Additional personnel?" he asked quietly. "What does that even mean?" Officer Cooper did not answer. He was still staring at the radio in his hand. During 6 years in law enforcement, he had received urgent calls before. Missing children, highway accidents, severe weather alerts, but never anything like this. The wording had been too careful, too deliberate. More importantly, the voice had not sounded local. Around the gas station, the crowd continued to grow. Vehicles slowed as they entered the lot. Drivers noticed the patrol cars and curious bystanders and decided to stay. Human nature rarely resisted a mystery. Angela Brooks stood near the SUV while Caleb sat on the curb beside her. The boy was drawing circles in the dust with the tip of his sneaker. To him, the adults seemed trapped inside a complicated conversation that made very little sense. "Grandma," he said quietly, "are those clouds coming this way?" Angela glanced upward. The gray sky had spread farther across the horizon. Looks like rain. Caleb smiled. You always know. Angela laughed softly. Not always. Most of the time. The simple exchange seemed almost out of place against the tension surrounding them. Yet that was what made it powerful. While everyone else worried about procedures, questions, and authority, Angela remained focused on the child beside her. A few yards away, the woman holding the fountain drink lowered her phone completely. Watching Angela now felt different. The assumptions she had made earlier no longer felt comfortable. The narrative she had built in her mind no longer fit the reality in front of her. Then another vehicle entered the station. Unlike the patrol cars, it carried no emergency markings. Dark gray, government plates, tinted windows. It rolled slowly across the parking lot before stopping near the edge of the crowd. The engine remained running. Nobody stepped out immediately. Several people exchanged nervous glances. Officer Cooper noticed it at once. His stomach tightened. Do you know them? The second officer asked. Cooper shook his head. No, the driver door opened. A man in a dark suit emerged. Mid-50s. Short gray hair. No visible badge. No visible insignia. Yet everything about him suggested authority. The way he walked. The way he scanned the scene. The way conversations seemed to die as he passed. He approached Cooper directly. Officer Daniel Cooper? Cooper nodded. Yes, sir. The man extended a hand. Special Agent Richard Hayes. Cooper shook it. The grip was firm. Professional. What agency? Hayes studied him for a moment. That is not important right now. The answer landed heavily. Cooper felt his pulse quicken. Hayes looked toward Angela. His expression softened immediately. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal recognition. Mrs. Brooks, he said. Angela offered a polite smile. Good afternoon, Richard. The crowd reacted instantly. Several people exchanged confused looks. They knew each other. Not casually. Not accidentally. The familiarity was obvious. Hayes nodded respectfully. I apologize for the inconvenience. It has been an interesting afternoon, Angela replied. Even now she sounded calm. Almost amused. Hayes glanced toward Caleb. And who is this young man? My grandson. Very nice to meet you. Caleb nodded shyly. The agent smiled before turning back toward Cooper. The temperature of the conversation changed immediately. Officer, Hayes said, how long has Mrs. Brooks been detained here? Cooper hesitated. Approximately 35 minutes. Hayes looked at his watch. A faint crease appeared between his eyebrows. 35 minutes. The words were not angry. Somehow that made them worse. Cooper suddenly felt as though every decision he had made that afternoon was being replayed in slow motion. Hayes took a slow breath and looked around the gas station. The crowd. The patrol vehicles. The phones recording from different angles. The curious faces. Then his gaze settled on the black SUV. Has anyone contacted General Brooks? Cooper froze. The second officer froze. Even several members of the crowd seemed to react to the name. General Brooks. The title alone carried weight. Cooper swallowed hard. No, sir. Hayes nodded once. That will not be necessary. Before Cooper could respond, a new sound drifted across the parking lot. More engines. Not one. Several. Heads turned toward the entrance of the station. Vehicles were arriving. Black sedans. Government plates. Moving with quiet precision. The crowd instinctively stepped back. Conversation stopped. Even the wind seemed to pause. Standing beside her grandson, Angela watched the approaching vehicles and released the smallest sigh. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something gentler than either. The sigh of a woman who had hoped the day would stay ordinary, but knew that possibility had just disappeared. The first drops of rain began tapping softly against the pavement just as the line of black sedans came to a stop. Their headlights reflected across the wet concrete, creating long ribbons of white and gold beneath the darkening sky. Nobody in the crowd spoke. Curiosity had turned into uncertainty. Uncertainty was quickly becoming something closer to disbelief. Officer Cooper stood beside his patrol vehicle, watching as several men and women stepped from the arriving cars. None wore military uniforms. None displayed obvious rank. Yet their presence carried a quiet gravity that seemed to change the atmosphere of the entire gas station. Every movement appeared measured. Every glance purposeful. Special Agent Hayes walked forward to meet them. A few brief words were exchanged. Then one of the newcomers handed him a folder. Hayes opened it, reviewed a page, and nodded. Across the parking lot, Angela remained beside Caleb. The boy had finished his water and was now watching the arriving vehicles with wide eyes. "Grandma," he asked softly, "are those people important?" Angela smiled. "Everyone is important, sweetheart." Caleb considered that answer. "You know what I mean." Angela laughed quietly. Even now, the sound carried warmth. "They have important jobs." The boy seemed satisfied with that explanation. Nearby, several people who had been recording with their phones slowly lowered them. Something about the scene no longer felt like entertainment. It felt serious, real. Officer Cooper watched Hayes approach again. The agent stopped directly in front of him. Rain dotted the shoulders of his dark jacket. "Officer," Hayes said calmly, "I need a complete timeline." Cooper immediately began explaining everything that had happened since the initial registration concern. He spoke carefully, methodically, yet the more he explained, the more uncomfortable he felt. Details that had seemed reasonable 30 minutes earlier now sounded different when spoken aloud. Assumptions, conclusions, judgments. Hayes listened without interruption. When Cooper finally finished, the agent nodded once. "Thank you." That was all. No criticism. No visible frustration. Somehow the restraint made Cooper feel worse. Across the lot, another vehicle entered the station. This one was different. Larger. Darker. The moment it appeared, several of the recently arrived officials shifted their attention toward it. The crowd noticed immediately. A hush spread through the parking lot. Even Caleb sensed the change. "Someone else is coming," he whispered. Angela looked toward the entrance. For the first time all afternoon, her expression softened with something deeper than patience. Recognition. The vehicle stopped. The engine went silent. Rain continued falling in a steady rhythm against the roof. Then the rear door opened. A tall man stepped out. His hair had turned more silver than black over the years. His posture remained straight despite decades of responsibility resting on his shoulders. He wore a simple dark overcoat. No medals. No ceremony. Nothing that announced his position to strangers. Yet the reaction around him was immediate. Conversations ended. Eyes followed him. Even the officials who had arrived earlier seemed to stand a little straighter. General Marcus Brooks crossed the parking lot at an unhurried pace. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Focused entirely on one person. Angela. The crowd watched as he approached her. Caleb broke into a smile first. "Grandpa." The boy ran forward. Marcus bent slightly and wrapped an arm around his grandson before lifting him briefly off the ground. "There is my favorite young man." Caleb grinned. "Mom says you say that to all your grandkids." Marcus smiled. "Your mother talks too much." Laughter rippled softly through a few nearby observers. The tension eased for only a moment. Then Marcus turned toward Angela. Neither spoke immediately. They simply looked at one another. 23 years of marriage existed inside that silence. Long deployments. Family dinners. Missed birthdays. Celebrated victories. Ordinary mornings. Extraordinary challenges. Marcus reached for her hand. Angela squeezed it gently. "You drove all the way out here in this weather?" she asked. "I heard you were having an interesting afternoon." Her smile widened slightly. "That depends on your definition of interesting." Several people nearby expected anger. They expected demands. They expected authority to arrive with force. Instead, they witnessed something entirely different. Concern. Respect. Affection. Marcus glanced toward Officer Cooper. The young officer immediately felt his stomach tighten. Yet when the general finally spoke, his voice remained calm. "Officer," he said, "thank you for staying with my family until everything could be sorted out." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Because in that moment, Cooper realized that the person who had shown the greatest dignity all afternoon had never been the one holding authority. It had been the woman standing quietly beside Pump 6 while everyone else rushed to conclusions. Rain settled into a gentle rhythm across the gas station roof. The crowd that had gathered earlier no longer looked eager for excitement. Most stood quietly now, as though they had become witnesses to something far more important than a misunderstanding over a vehicle registration. The air smelled of wet pavement and gasoline. Water rolled down the edges of parked cars and gathered in small silver puddles beneath the pumps. Marcus Brooks stood beside his wife and grandson, one hand resting lightly on Caleb's shoulder. He could have commanded attention if he wanted to. Decades of leadership had taught him how. Yet he seemed completely uninterested in authority at that moment. His attention remained fixed on his family. Angela looked toward the dark clouds hanging low over the horizon. The storm was not severe, just steady, peaceful almost. It reminded her of evenings spent on the front porch years ago while Marcus was overseas. Rain had always made her reflective. It slowed the world down enough to hear her own thoughts. Caleb leaned against her side. The long day was finally catching up with him. "Grandma," he asked softly, "can we still stop for pizza on the way home?" Angela smiled. "After all this, I think we have earned pizza." The boy grinned. Marcus laughed quietly. "I am glad someone here still has priorities." For the first time all afternoon, Angela felt the tension inside her begin to fade. Not because important people had arrived. Not because everyone suddenly understood who she was connected to. Those things mattered far less than people assumed. What mattered was that Caleb felt safe again. What mattered was that the confusion was ending. Across the parking lot, Officer Cooper stood beneath the edge of the station awning. Water dripped steadily from the roof above him. He watched Angela laughing with her grandson and felt an uncomfortable weight settle deeper into his chest. Earlier, he had seen only a situation, a vehicle, a question, a procedure. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing the person standing in front of him. The realization was difficult to ignore now. Special Agent Hayes approached quietly. "Long day?" he asked. Cooper gave a weak smile. "You could say that." Hayes looked toward Angela. "Do you know what impresses me most about her?" Cooper shook his head. "She never once tried to use her connections." The young officer remained silent. Hayes continued. "Most people would have made a phone call immediately." Cooper watched Angela hand Caleb a napkin from her purse after the boy spilled a few drops of water on his shirt. Such a small moment. Such an ordinary moment. Yet somehow it said everything. Hayes folded his hands behind his back. "Power has an interesting way of revealing character," he said. "Some people use it to elevate themselves. Others do not need to use it at all." Cooper understood exactly what he meant. The rain softened further. The steady tapping against metal roofs became little more than a whisper. Several members of the crowd began returning to their vehicles. The woman with the fountain drink tossed her empty cup into a trash can before leaving. The teenagers who had stayed to watch climbed into their car and drove away. Life was slowly returning to normal. Yet something about the afternoon would stay with them. A lesson without a lecture. A reminder without a speech. Angela looked around the parking lot one last time. Earlier, the place had felt tense and crowded. Now it seemed strangely quiet. She noticed the reflections of the station lights shimmering across the wet pavement. She noticed the smell of rain drifting through the air. She noticed Officer Cooper standing alone beneath the awning. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The young officer quickly looked away. Angela did not. There was no anger in her expression. No triumph. Only understanding. And somehow that felt heavier than criticism ever could. Marcus followed her gaze and then looked back at his wife. "You are thinking again," he said. Angela smiled softly. "I always think." "That is true." Caleb yawned loudly beside them. Marcus laughed. "Now that is the clearest signal we have received all day." The three stood together beneath the gray sky while the last of the rain drifted across the station. Around them, engines started. Doors closed. People returned to their lives. But beneath the fading storm and the quiet hum of the highway, something unseen had already begun to change in the heart of one young officer who would remember this afternoon long after everyone else had forgotten it. The rain finally stopped. Thin rays of late afternoon sunlight pushed through the clouds, turning the wet pavement into a sheet of reflected gold. The gas station looked different now. Quieter. Smaller somehow. The line of black government vehicles remained parked near the edge of the lot, but the urgency that had accompanied their arrival had faded. Most of the crowd had already dispersed. Those who remained spoke in hushed voices, glancing occasionally toward Angela Brooks and her family. Officer Cooper stood alone near the entrance of the convenience store. He watched as Caleb climbed into the back seat of the SUV and immediately began talking about pizza again. The boy's energy had returned, as if the entire afternoon had been nothing more than an unexpected delay. Angela listened patiently, smiling as she always did. Marcus stood nearby, one hand resting on the open door. For a moment, Cooper found himself studying the scene. Not the titles, not the positions, not the vehicles or officials, just the family. A husband, a wife, a grandson, ordinary people sharing an ordinary moment. Yet that simple image forced him to confront something uncomfortable. Earlier that day, He had never truly seen Angela as a person first. He had seen a situation, a possibility, a concern to investigate. Somewhere between procedure and assumption, humanity had become secondary. The realization lingered heavily in his chest. Special Agent Hayes approached one last time. "You should speak with her," he said quietly. Cooper looked surprised. "You think I should?" Hayes nodded. "Some opportunities do not come twice." The agent walked away before Cooper could answer. For several seconds, the young officer remained where he was. Then he took a slow breath and crossed the parking lot. Marcus noticed him first. The general's expression remained calm. Angela turned as Cooper approached. The sunlight reflected softly across the water droplets still resting on the hood of the SUV. "Mrs. Brooks," Cooper began. His voice sounded different now. Less certain, more honest. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Angela nodded. "Of course." Cooper glanced briefly at Marcus before looking back at her. "I owe you an apology." The words came out slower than he expected. "I should have listened more carefully. I should have asked better questions. And I should have remembered that being respectful costs nothing." Silence followed. Not an uncomfortable silence, just a truthful one. Angela studied him for a moment. The young officer expected criticism, maybe disappointment. Instead, she offered a small smile. "Do you know something I learned after 30 years of teaching children?" Cooper shook his head. "Most mistakes begin the same way." "How?" "People stop being curious." The answer caught him off guard. Angela continued gently. "The moment we think we already know everything about someone, we stop listening." Cooper lowered his eyes. Every word felt painfully accurate. Angela folded her hands together. "What matters is what you do after the mistake." The officer nodded slowly. Across the parking lot, the last remaining spectators quietly departed. Engine started. Tires rolled across wet pavement. The world continued moving forward. Yet for Cooper, the afternoon felt suspended in time. "Thank you," he said softly. Angela smiled. "You are welcome." Marcus stepped forward then, extending a hand. Cooper hesitated only a moment before shaking it. "Take care of yourself, officer," Marcus said. "And remember something." "Sir." Marcus glanced toward Angela. "The most important people in your community are often the ones nobody notices." Cooper looked at Angela again. A retired teacher, a grandmother, a woman who had spent the entire afternoon showing patience to people who had not always shown it to her. Suddenly the lesson seemed obvious. The general released his hand. Caleb leaned out the back window. "Grandma says we are getting pizza." Marcus laughed. "Then we should not keep him waiting." Angela climbed into the passenger seat. Marcus closed the door gently before walking around to the driver's side. The engine started. For a moment, the vehicle remained still. Then Angela lowered the window. "Officer Cooper?" He stepped forward. "Yes, ma'am." Her smile carried the same warmth she had shown her students for decades. "Keep asking questions. Just ask them with kindness." Before he could respond, the window rolled up. The SUV pulled away slowly, disappearing beyond the station exit and onto the open road. Cooper remained standing beneath the clearing sky long after the vehicle was gone. The sunlight reflected across the wet pavement. Somewhere above, the clouds were finally breaking apart. And for the first time that day, he understood that the most important thing he had discovered had never been hidden inside a registration record or an identification card. It had been standing in front of him all along. The drive home felt different after the storm. Rainwater still clung to the trees lining the highway, and the evening sun painted the clouds in shades of gold and amber. Inside the SUV, Caleb sat in the back seat talking excitedly about pizza toppings while Marcus listened with exaggerated seriousness, occasionally asking questions that made the boy laugh. Angela watched them from the passenger seat and smiled quietly. The tension of the afternoon seemed far away now, dissolving mile by mile beneath the rolling tires. Yet some moments have a way of following people home. 2 days later, Officer Daniel Cooper sat alone at his kitchen table long after sunset. A half-finished cup of coffee rested beside a stack of reports. Through the apartment window, city lights flickered against the darkness. Normally, he would have forgotten a routine stop by now. There had been hundreds of them over the years. But this one refused to leave his mind. He kept hearing Angela's words. "The moment we think we already know everything about someone, we stop listening." He replayed the afternoon repeatedly. Not because anyone had filed a complaint. Not because anyone had threatened consequences. In fact, nobody had done either. That was what bothered him most. The people involved had shown him more grace than he felt he deserved. The following week, Cooper found himself driving past an elementary school near the edge of town. Children were leaving for the day. Teachers stood near the entrance, greeting parents and directing students toward waiting cars. As he slowed at a red light, he noticed a familiar face near the front walkway. Angela Brooks. She was speaking with a young teacher while several children gathered around her. Even from a distance, he could see how naturally they gravitated toward her. Some people carried authority. Others carried trust. Angela carried both without ever demanding either. Before he could talk himself out of it, Cooper pulled into the visitor parking area and walked toward the school entrance. Angela spotted him almost immediately. "Officer Cooper," she said warmly. "Good afternoon." The young officer smiled awkwardly. "Mrs. Brooks." Several children nearby looked up curiously before continuing on their way. Angela noticed the uncertainty in his expression and waited patiently. Finally he spoke. "I wanted to thank you." She tilted her head slightly. "For what?" "For being kinder than you had to be." For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of children laughing echoed across the playground behind them. A flag moved gently in the breeze above the school entrance. Angela looked toward the students crossing the parking lot. "You know," she said softly, "when I was teaching, I learned something important." Cooper listened carefully. Most people become who they are because someone gave them a chance to grow. The officer considered her words. "Even after mistakes?" Angela smiled. "Especially after mistakes." A small silence followed, the kind that felt thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. Then one of the teachers approached and handed Angela a folder. "Thank you for speaking to the reading group today," the teacher said. "The kids loved it." Angela laughed. "I think I had more fun than they did." As the teacher walked away, Cooper glanced at the folder. It contained handwritten thank you notes from students. Crayon drawings, stick figures, bright colors, simple acts of appreciation. Somehow they felt more meaningful than any title or recognition. "You still teach," he observed. Angela looked down at the notes and smiled. "I suppose I always will." Cooper nodded slowly. In that moment, he finally understood something that had escaped him at the gas station. Angela had never measured people by status. Not by uniforms. Not by wealth. Not by influence. She measured them by character. It was the reason she could stand calmly in the middle of misunderstanding without becoming bitter. It was the reason children trusted her. It was the reason even powerful people listened when she spoke. As the afternoon sun settled lower over the school grounds, Cooper extended his hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Brooks." Angela shook it gently. "Take care of yourself, officer." This time, when he walked away, the weight he had been carrying felt lighter. Not because the memory had disappeared, but because he had finally learned the lesson hidden inside it. And as Angela turned back toward the children waiting near the playground, she never realized that the greatest thing she had taught that week had not happened inside a classroom at all. Autumn arrived quietly that year. Leaves drifted across sidewalks in shades of gold and crimson, gathering beneath park benches and along neighborhood streets. Life moved forward the way it always did. School buses appeared each morning. Store owners unlocked their doors. Families gathered for dinners, birthdays, and ordinary conversations. Yet some stories continued long after the moment itself had passed. One Saturday afternoon, Angela Brooks sat on a wooden bench overlooking a small community park. Children chased one another across a field still damp from an early morning rain. The air carried the scent of cut grass and fallen leaves. Beside her sat Marcus, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Neither spoke much. They rarely needed to. After 23 years together, silence often said more than words. Across the playground, Caleb climbed a rope structure while shouting directions to a group of friends. Every few minutes, he looked back toward his grandparents just to make sure they were still there. They always were. Marcus handed Angela a cup. "You are thinking again." Angela smiled without looking away from the playground. "I told you years ago that was not going to stop." Marcus laughed softly. "I remember." A gentle breeze moved through the trees overhead. For a moment, neither spoke. The afternoon sun filtered through the branches, scattering patches of light across the grass. The world felt peaceful, uncomplicated, exactly the kind of moment Angela valued most. Nearby, a police cruiser rolled slowly past the park entrance before continuing down the street. Angela barely noticed it. Marcus did. He glanced toward it for only a second before returning his attention to the children. The memory of the gas station had faded for them. Not disappeared, simply settled into its proper place. One chapter among many. One lesson among countless others. Across town, Officer Daniel Cooper had changed in small ways that few people noticed. He listened longer now, asked more questions, assumed less. The change was not dramatic enough to make headlines. Most meaningful changes never are. Yet every so often, during difficult conversations or uncertain situations, he remembered a retired teacher standing calmly beneath a gray sky while everyone around her rushed to conclusions. And he remembered choosing to do better. Back at the park, Caleb finally ran toward the bench, breathing hard and smiling. "Grandpa, watch this." Before anyone could answer, he raced back toward the playground to attempt something he clearly considered very impressive. Marcus shook his head. "I think he inherited his confidence from your side of the family." "That is a generous interpretation." The two shared a quiet laugh. The sunlight continued lowering across the horizon. Long shadows stretched over the grass. Parents began gathering their children. One by one, the sounds of the playground softened. Angela watched the scene unfold and felt grateful for its simplicity. No titles mattered here. No positions. No recognition. Just people. Families. Lives intersecting in ordinary ways. The things that truly mattered had always been surprisingly small. A kind word. A patient moment. A willingness to listen. The breeze lifted again, carrying a handful of leaves across the path in front of the bench. They tumbled gently before settling near Angela's feet. She watched them for a moment. Then she looked toward Marcus. He was watching Caleb, smiling, completely at peace. Angela slipped her hand into his. He squeezed it gently. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Beyond the park, the evening sky glowed with fading gold. The last light of the day shimmered across the pond nearby. Children laughed in the distance. Leaves whispered through the trees. And as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, the world seemed to pause for one perfect moment, leaving behind only the quiet, unmistakable sound of grace.